Shalom Uvracha. In this week's parasha, the Torah presents us with a new reason for the prohibition of avodah zarah. This is the issur that comes up in the Torah countless times. The entire Torah is filled with a prohibition against idolatry, against avodah zarah. But in this week's parasha, we find a new reason, so far unmentioned by the Torah. And the pasuk says as follows: Lo ta'asekein laHashem Elokecha. Don't follow avodah zarah. Don't be doresh leEloheim like the other nations of Canaan. Why not? Ki kol toyavas Hashem asher saneh. For all of the abominations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu despises, asu leEloheihem. That's the way in which they worship their gods. Ki gam es bneihem ve'es benuseim yisrafu ba'esh leEloheim. Even human sacrifice that HaKadosh Baruch Hu despises, He hates. That's what they do to their gods. And the question is, why do we need this additional reason not to serve avodah zarah? Isn't it enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out from Mitzrayim and gave us the Torah, and He is our God, and therefore we mustn't serve any others? Why do we need this extra reason that they've done all of these abominations? Moreover, we find this in Halacha. The Meiri says, relating to a number of interactions with non-Jews that the Torah prohibits, the Meiri says that these restrictions apply specifically to Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and specifically to those Ovdei Avodah Zarah Hakdumim, he says, those who are not, in his words, Gedurim Bedoseim Uve Nimuseim, meaning that their ways are ways that are not constrained. They live unconstrained ways in their Nimuseim, in their human activities. They don't have any of the restraints that a modern or that a civilized society would expect. That's the way, says the Meiri, of Ovdei Avodah Zarah, of idolaters. They do all of these abominations that the Torah describes. And the question is, why is this inherent to idolatry? Why do these abominations go together with Avodah Zarah? And why is this a part of the prohibition, of the Torah's prohibition against avodah zarah? So I think what's underlying here, the secret that the Torah is telling us, is that avodas Hashem and avodah zarah are not just a question of getting the right address. It's not just making sure that you direct your avodah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu rather than to idolatry, but rather these two modes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu versus avodah zarah, also define an entirely different conception of what it means to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it means to serve a higher power. The concept of avodas Hashem is a concept of relationship. The Torah tells us that we are in a close, an intimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Mishnah describes this as Yom Chatunasai, like a relationship of husband and wife. And that relationship is a relationship of goodness, a relationship of blessing, a relationship of closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we just look at a few psukim before these psukim, where the Torah describes our avodah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah repeats time after time the joy, the happiness, the goodness of this avodah, of avodas Hashem. Usmachtem, you should be joyful, you should delight. B'chol mishnach yedchem atem uvotechem. Usmachtem, you should be happy. Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem, before Hashem. Atem uvneichem uvnosechem, you, your children. Avdechem v'amosechem, your servants. V'alevi Hashem b'shareichem, all of you. V'samachta, the Torah says. Lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'chol mishlach yodecha. And so on, time after time. Avodas Hashem is an avodah of closeness, an avodah of relationship, in which we experience the joy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu together, and we serve Him out of that joy. Avodah zarah is not like that. It's called zar. It's by definition foreign. It's estranged. There's no closeness between a person and between his avodah zarah. It's automation. You have to press the right buttons, and by pressing the right buttons, you draw down whichever blessing or whichever benefit you want to derive from that power, from that avodah zarah. So if it's the God of power, then you'll derive power by pressing the right buttons. the goddess of love, or the god of wisdom, or whoever it might be. And what's the channel to derive this bounty, to derive this blessing? It could be ki gam es bneim ve'es benuseim yisrafu ba'esh le'eloheim. It could be human sacrifice. It could be any other abomination, whether an abomination of human interaction or any other kind of abomination that we find in all of these pagan deities, in these Ovdei Avodah Zarah. And indeed, these things do go together, like the Meiri says, like the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us it's not just a question of getting the right address. It's also a question of the type of avodah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects from us. He expects from us an avodah not of automation, not of pressing the right buttons, but an avodah of relationship, of drawing close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of appreciating His goodness, appreciating the blessing that He bestows upon us, and reciprocating with our avodah. That's avodas Hashem. It's diametrically opposed to avodah zarah, not just in the question of whom do we serve, but in the question of how do we serve, in the question of what type of avodah HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects from us. And even today, of course, we have our challenges. Of course, we all have hardships, and the current period, the Corona period, highlights them. But we are beholden. HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects us to look out, to focus on the goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us in our lives, in our society, in our world, to focus on the good and to serve Him out of an appreciation of that goodness. Not for nothing does the Chovas HaLevavos emphasize that the most central thing in Avodas Hashem is Akaras HaTov, to appreciate His goodness, to appreciate His blessing, His bounty, and to serve Him from that appreciation. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, we should all be zoiche to see, to feel, to experience the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives, in our families, in our societies, in our world, and to appreciate, to live with that appreciation, with that sense of closeness, of intimacy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our everyday lives. We should all have a wonderful Shabbos.